We're now joined by a writer who covers the LA Kings out on the West Coast. He does do some radio work as well. You can follow him on twitter.com/MayorNHL. It is John Hoven. Hey, John, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing today?
Very well, thank you. First of all, must be a long wait between those games in that Kings Canucks series. I'm sure you're excited to see the action this evening.
Oh, for sure. 3 days off is a long time, and it's hard to come up with new questions with that many days off. So it's going to be great to get Game 5 going tonight here in just a couple hours.
Hey, John, before we get to that, did you have a chance to see the Penguins game, which must have been 9 a.m. start for you out in the West Coast?
Yeah, I missed about the first half hour of it, which I was a little disappointed in because by far it's been my favorite series to keep an eye on. And, the Flyers look good offensively, but they're going to need some better goaltending if they have any thoughts of making it out of the second round.
Can you imagine, John, what kind of force a guy like Chris Pronger would have been in that series? How much more maybe physical would that series have been with a guy like Chris Pronger in there?
I don't know if that series could handle any more physicality. When you have guys like Crosby willing to drop the gloves and being as aggressive as he was, along with all of the other players, it would have been interesting, though, to have Chris Pronger in there. The defense and the goaltending and, some of those non-offensive statistics would have certainly looked different if you had a guy like Chris Pronger in there.
From what you saw in this series, and it looks like Boston has forced a Game 7. There you go. Boston winning 4-3, 16:43 of the overtime. What's Mokan clapping for?
That was a beautiful goal there by the Bruins, about maybe 6 or 8 feet out of the net, and just a nice wrist shot. Beautiful.
There we go. Game 7 will happen. Boston versus Washington, just like the NHL loves. Extra games, extra revenue, I'm sure. From what you saw out of Sidney Crosby, to me, my impressions today, looked like a peripheral player. A guy who was just using his hands and his eye hand and his tremendous skill to try and create something, but it didn't look like his stamina or heart or willingness to go in the corners, and maybe just inability right now is the reason for it. What did you see out of him today and maybe as well in the series?
Well, the Pens did look like a broken team today. They just didn't seem to have that grit, that fire, or that desire to pull this game out and to push the series a little bit further. Philly was able to take it to them at home, which is what you want as the home team. And the Flyers really dictated the pace of the series more often than not. Obviously, Pittsburgh had their big offensive explosion. They won by a couple touchdowns, a few days ago. But for the most part, Philadelphia was in control. Even when Philadelphia was behind early in the series, you still had that feeling like the Penguins were not in control of the game and that at any given moment, the Flyers were going to come back, and certainly they did that several times, being down by a number of goals. The Flyers just looked like they wanted it more, and today they look like they wanted it more than they did in any other game, and that's why the orange and black came out on top.
Tyler Seguin scoring the game winner, by the way, today in that Bruins series. Beautiful move, as John mentioned, just outwaiting Holtby, the young goaltender, and putting it away. We're chatting with John Hoven from Mayor's Manor, or you can go to the website mayorsmanor.com, or you can follow him on twitter.com/mayorNHL. We do have a tweet coming in from S. Ruley17. He says, Flyers will beat up Ottawa in the second round and lose to Washington. Well, I don't know if that's going to happen now. Pittsburgh sucked from the beginning. So a lot of disappointment surrounding the Pittsburgh Penguins. And, John, I don't know what you do if you move forward here as a Penguins fan or with that organization. Is Fleury a guy that's going to take a lot of heat because of what happened in this series? And do you start to question whether or not he's your starter moving forward? What do you do?
Yeah, Fleury absolutely is going to take some heat, as the starting goaltenders usually do in a series. When a team loses a series. It's a great question. What do you do? Everybody thought that when 87 came back towards the end of the season, they were then going to be the odds-on favorite. Looked like they even had a shot to overtake the Rangers in the Eastern Conference for the number one spot. The Rangers came storming back after it looked like they were running out of steam. But you had a healthy Chris Letang. You had Crosby back. The other thing, though, is Malkin. For some reason, Malkin seems to be the type of player, and we've seen this time and time again, when Crosby's out of the lineup, he raises his game to a new level, and he absolutely dominates the NHL and looks like the best player on the ice most nights. When Crosby's back in the lineup, Malkin, for some reason, seems to be content to be the second-best player on the team, and that's going to have to change. coaching. Obviously, Blausma's not going to get run out of Pittsburgh. That's not even on the table. But Laviolette certainly did out-coach him many of the games there, so there's some questions. And you have to wonder if a guy like Tony Granato is going to be back. His name surfaced in a couple coaching vacancies that took place during midseason, although the Penguins were not likely to let Granato go in the middle of the season. But you have to wonder if Tony Granato is going to move on and possibly become a head coach. So there might be some changes happening in Pittsburgh, maybe behind the bench, some other things like that. But, what do you do? Do you run Marc-Andre Fleury out of town? Do you trade him? Probably not. So for the most part, I would expect Ray Shero to reload and for the Penguins to pretty much look the same on the ice going into next season. That would be my bet.
All right, as for the Flyers, they will move on to the second round. Do they have some lasting power here in this postseason, John, or are they pretty much spent? We saw guys like Kimmo Timonen hobbling on and off the ice, and they have so many rookies who obviously now have a little bit more experience, but against a different animal, a different team, not sure who they're going to match up with just yet. It could very well be a lower seed team, could still be a higher seed team. What do you expect out of the Flyers in round two?
The Flyers aren't going to run out of steam because they have those young kids that you mentioned. And, the NHL today is a young man's game, so you can't discount those fresh legs on those 18, 19, 20-year-old kids. You look at Braden Shen, you look at Couturier and those guys, and Claude Giroux looks like a man possessed right now as well. So, yeah, they do have some holes defensively without Pronger, like we talked about. Goaltending seems to always be the big question there in Philadelphia. But offensively, they should be able to take it to whoever they're going to match up against. So unless they run into a team with a really strong defense that can hold them off the boards, Philadelphia is going to have a chance. But, we know that defense and goaltending historically wins championships in not only the National Hockey League, but most sports in general. So for the Flyers to go on a deep run, they're going to need to step up their game at some point. But, offensively, they should be fun to watch in the second round, just like they were in the first round.
All right, as for the series that you're watching very closely, Kings versus the Canucks, we saw the Canucks finally come out with a pretty good effort, all linked to Daniel Sedin. I would imagine if you're the Kings, anything to adjust between the Game 4 and Game 5 in here?
Yeah, absolutely. The adjustment was the problem in Game 4. The Kings didn't make the adjustments between the first and second period. Vancouver came out. They played a tight first period in Game 4 as they adjusted to Sedin being back in the lineup, and the Kings were on the scoreboard up 1-0 going into the first intermission. But the Kings didn't make the necessary adjustments. The Canucks did, and the Kings didn't put enough pressure on them. Therefore, the Canucks dominated the second and third period and came out with the win. So for the Kings to win tonight, one of the 5 keys that I laid out this morning on Mayor's Manor, one of those keys is to apply more pressure. They need to close down the gap, especially against the Sedin brothers, and play a more aggressive game. When the Kings do that, they normally win most nights.
All right, John, final thought here on the Kings versus the Canucks. We saw the forming of a line with Kessler, Burrows, and Lapierre. A nice sandpaper line with a bit of scoring, bit of attitude, bit of everything, really. A lot has been made of it here on the highlight shows. Your thoughts on whether or not this unit has some lasting power in this series, if indeed Vancouver can win tonight?
Well, if you're the Kings, the one thing that you don't want to see happen is you don't want to see Kessler wake up. He's been a different player this year coming off of the injury. He's been pretty quiet other than a lot of diving and that sort of thing in the series. You don't want to see him wake up offensively. Max has been able to get under the skin of a couple of guys, especially Drew Doughty, who said earlier in the week that he'd love to punch him in the face, but Doughty's been composed. What the Kings need to do is they need to basically worry about their own game. They need another strong game from Jonathan Quick. They're going up against Corey Schneider, a guy who's only given up 1 goal in each of the last 2 games. So the Kings need to just worry about their own game if they're going to close this thing out. On the road, it's going to be tough. It's going to be a loud building. But if you're the Kings, you want to hurry up, get this series over with. You don't want to let Vancouver get any more life, back into their veins like they did picking up that win there in Game 4.
Do you have a prediction for tonight?
I had a prediction going into Game 4, and it didn't work out too well. So let's just say the Kings need to close this game out, and it's going to be a tight game, probably a 2-1, maybe a 3-1 finish.
John, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. It's John Hoven. You can follow him on Mayor NHL on Twitter.com, or you can go to mayorsmanor.com to tee yourself up for Kings Canucks this evening. John, thanks a lot.
Look forward to it. Talk to you later.